Good evening. Welcome, welcome. Nice to see you all. Nice to practice together. I wanted to talk a little bit about thoughts tonight. In other settings, I've been talking about thoughts, and I'd like to talk about it some more here. Because there's this way, like when we sit down and meditate, like we just did for 30 minutes, there often can be this sense of like, dang it, where are all these thoughts here? Or there can be a sense of like, why is the mind so busy? Or if only my thoughts were different or would go away or something like this. Even if it's those expressions weren't explicitly said in the mind, there can be a way in which we have a little like resistance or aversive relationship to our thoughts, especially when we're meditating. When we're not meditating, we love our thoughts. But when we're meditating, we often are, wish it would go away or be otherwise in some kind of way. So in this tradition, as many of you know, this is not about getting rid of thoughts. We don't have to do that. Turns out you can't in the way that you think you might be able to anyway. But really what's being pointed to is just noticing our relationship to thoughts. So it's more about noticing and just how we are engaging with thoughts, how we're being with them. Are we all in, like in love with them and being entertained by them? Or are we, when we wake up from being lost in thought, thinking like, oh shoot, I'm supposed to be meditating. Oh, here we go again. When you're lost in thought while you're meditating, no problem, because you're lost in thought. There's like nothing to be done, right? You just are lost in thought. You can't make yourself not be lost in thought. So somehow, I know at the beginning of my meditation practice, somehow I thought that I should be able to wake myself up, but it doesn't work that way. Probably you've noticed that we don't have this way we do this. We can't like just force things to be the way that we want them to be. And I say this a lot, and if you could, you wouldn't be here at a meditation center on a Monday night. You would be out having whatever thoughts you wanted, whenever you wanted. So maybe it's helpful to just say briefly, well, why is there often just this incessant flow of thoughts while we're sitting down to meditate? One way or one reason it might be is that it can support a sense of feeling safe. That's probably not what's on top of mind. Instead, what the mind is doing, it has this sense of like, I gotta figure this out. I gotta solve this problem. I gotta get to the end of this. I gotta make this be different in some kind of way. And there's this way that we feel like, okay, well, if I only figure this out, then everything will be fine, and then I'll be safe and comfortable, maybe. Maybe that's another way of thinking about it. But there's this way in which trying to figure things out or try to solve a problem really takes us away from what's being experienced, from what's here right now. And it turns out if we want to be safe, really it's just to be with what's actually happening. Because the harm is going to be, in this moment. I'm not saying that we don't have to plan. Sometimes we do have to plan. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if there's a feeling of wanting to be safe or feeling unsafe, then it's to be with our experience, like what's being heard, what's being seen, what's being experienced with the body. I'm rocking like this, like often, to feel your feet on the ground and feel like, oh, I'm actually here. Or maybe there's just a lot of thinking because that's what we've been trained to do. That's what we've been conditioned to do. Certainly we have an educational program that supports that. A lot of thinking, of course. And many of us have had professions or jobs that really supported a lot of thinking, and we got rewarded for our thinking. And so this is, of course, we've been doing this our life long. It's not going to stop just all of a sudden. So that's another reason why there might be a lot of thoughts. But here's one that I had, which I didn't even really notice that I had in the beginning of my meditation practice. And it was with a meditation teacher who kind of pointed this out to me. And that was, I had this like discomfort with just not knowing. Like I felt like, oh, I just have to know everything. I just, I don't know, I just felt better. And I couldn't like say exactly why. So some of you may know I'm like trained as a researcher, right? So this was like suited me perfectly. Just go figure things out. And I loved it when I was a research scientist. I just have a question. I wonder if it's because of this, and then go design experiments and do experiments. I just loved it. It kind of like supported this idea, like to know things is like the most important. We don't have to know everything, it turns out. We feel uncomfortable, like not knowing things, but there's this way in which just this wanting to know is just thoughts talking to other thoughts, talking to other thoughts, talking to other thoughts. So often it's, in some ways, it's just a distraction. It's a way in which we're trying to feel more comfortable. And because we figure like, if I just knew everything, I would feel better. But often what's going to help us feel better is to align with the reality of the moment. But so often the reality of the moment is exactly what we don't want. It's too hot, it's too cold, they didn't talk to me the right way, I should have done that thing. So I don't know, there's just so many ways in which it feels like not quite right. And so we often like just kind of escape into thoughts and try to figure something out. There's this way that's can be a certain type of entertainment, but I'll talk a little bit more about entertainment in a moment, but also it's just a distraction from the present moment experience. If we're okay with what's happening, then there isn't this push to leave this moment. So there's this way that our thoughts, we can't control them, of course not. Anybody who's ever had a song stuck in their mind, sometimes called like an earworm, right? Knows that, oh, why is this song still happening here? You didn't make it there, you didn't put it there. And you can't make it just go away, it just shows up again and again, right? So these things, they just arise spontaneously, out of our control. They're just, that's what thoughts do. That's the nature of thoughts. It's not something that we're intentionally trying to do. So maybe instead of this idea that we have to get rid of our thoughts, or that we should have only, maybe I'll just stay there, instead of having this idea that we have to get rid of our thoughts. Instead, can we have this maybe aspirations for different types of relationships we can have with our thoughts? Instead of trying to control them, can we have some different relationships? And one relationship is, can we not feel harassed or harangued by our thoughts? Is there a way that we can say, wow, that's kind of annoying that song is stuck in my head? Well, okay, that's just the way it is. And let it be okay, even though it's not what we want. Because there's this way of trying to make it be different, or that little bit of irritation that shows up, or trying to figure out, like, why is this song in my head? That's this way in which we're fueling them, interacting with them. But then if we have this idea, okay, I don't want to interact with them, so I'm not going to, so that they'll go away, but there's still that secret. I'm trying to get them to go away, so I'm not going to think about them. But it's that trying to make them go away, that's going to have them persist. So can we just have a relationship that we're just not harassed or harangued? Like, yeah, okay, this is what the mind is doing. We don't have to take it personally. We don't have to make it a problem. We're not making it happen. It's, we're not choosing to have these thoughts. And just allow them to be there the best we can. I'll talk a little bit more like how we can work with some particular thoughts. There's maybe another aspiration we can have with our thinking is, can we discern maybe helpful from unhelpful trains of thought? The Buddha talked about there's this whatever one thinker thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of the mind. So with this recognition, right, that we, in some ways, are kind of like making these grooves in the mind with things that we think about a lot. Whatever we think about a lot just becomes easier and easier to think about it. So if we can notice, well, what's helpful and what's not helpful, if these grooves are going to be made, can we have some helpful grooves made as opposed to some unhelpful ones? And the Buddha talked about this. This was part of his path towards awakening, when he discovered or noticed, oh, there are some thoughts that are helpful and some that aren't. Some that lead to suffering, dukkha, and some that don't. And then he talked about, when he started to investigate, he boiled it down to thoughts of cruelty, not helpful. Causes affliction and dukkha for myself, and probably leaks out and causes it for others too. Thoughts of ill will, just this, not cruelty, not harming, but just like aversion and wanting to push away, turns out not to be helpful. And thoughts of sensual desire, just thinking about how you're going to satisfy every desire you've ever had, or something like this, also turns out not to be helpful. So there's this way in which, when we can feel into, or maybe just logically notice, like follow, so trains of thoughts, like, yeah, it's not so helpful, then there's a way that some of the power behind them, some of the authority or some of the momentum behind them can start to lessen. So just to make this observation, is this leading to something that's helpful or not? Is this helpful or not helpful? And helpful we can define as leading to more ease, leading to more peace, leading to more freedom. I keep on saying this, and then I'll talk about a little bit what to do with things that aren't helpful. If you find yourself stuck in something that's really not helpful, I'll talk about that at the end here. But something that I think is really fascinating is, here's the Buddha, at least his teachings preserved in the Pali Canon, thousands of years ago. Here's somebody who's saying, all this thinking is tiring and it's straining. He was just maybe pointing out how, if we really notice this, like always trying to figure things out, or always trying to entertain ourselves, or whatever it is, it turns out to be taxing. But we don't notice it's taxing unless we have a meditation practice that we have experienced some calmness and then stability. And then we can realize, oh yeah, this calmness compared to what my mind is usually doing is quite something. And this certainly has been my experience, and I think this is one way we could describe this whole path of practice, is just starting to notice just more and more subtle levels of agitation. We think like, oh wow, this is fantastic, and then a little bit more meditation practice, or maybe it doesn't even have to be meditation practice, we start to say, oh yeah, there was that little bit more agitation I didn't notice. That's even a little bit more quiet, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And we could say this is the entire path of practice. So in this way, we could say subtle is significant, like seeing subtle agitation, subtle way in which thinking is tiring, taxing, and straining can be a support. for us to not always be pursuing it. But then we can, and then maybe the third aspiration we might have for our relationship to our thoughts is, well, can we, if recognizing that planning is really helpful, appropriate, we need to do it, we do need to solve problems. There are plenty of problems to solve, big problems, small problems, lots of them. We need thinking. So is there a way that we can learn to think well? Like to use thinking to actually solve problems, to help ourselves, to help others, to make the world a better place, to help us find more ease and freedom. This isn't necessarily during the meditation practice, but is there a way that we can learn to think well, as opposed to maybe just simply agreeing or disagreeing with what we hear in the media or social media or mainstream media or whatever it might be? Instead of just like, oh, I don't like that, that's terrible. Oh yeah, this is good, this makes me feel good. Can we do something a little bit beyond that to solve problems? Can we think in a way that really leads to a place that is, can we think in a way that's helpful, that leads to a place that has more freedom? So there's this way in which thinking well, we can say, includes asking questions. Like, what do I know about this? What do I not know about this? What is not being said here? What if I were to look at this from a different direction? And we could say that the Buddha did this as well. As part of his awakening process too, he asked some questions, starting with like, well, what is it that is, we could paraphrase and say, the big problem? He identified it as death, as the big problem. And he's like, well, what causes to death? Well, why is there death? What is leading to death? Came up with an answer, but then he didn't stop there. He came up with another, like, well, then what leads to that? And why is this like that? And thinking in this way and pondering and coming up with a way that pointed to direct experience as part of a key part of finding our freedom. So can we use our thoughts? This most likely is not during meditation, but at another time, in a way that asks questions and has a commitment to finding the answer, has a commitment to solving the problem. Otherwise, there's this way we'll just spin around and around and around. I'm sure all of us have done this, right? There can be this feeling of stuckness, like I can't figure this out, I don't know what to do. But there's a way in which we can't find our way forward. I'll talk a little bit more about how to do this in a meditation practice. But one way to do this, to help with thinking outside of meditation, which we really do want to use thoughts to solve a problem or to plan, it turns out it can be really helpful. Use a pen and paper. Kind of this old-fashioned way. Remember those pens and paper? There's something like when we write something down, then it doesn't have to be kind of like held in the mind in the same way. And then there's a way in which we can write something else down, and then we can like draw arrows or draw X's or circle things, or there's a way in which we can get the stuff out of our mind and onto paper. Can be a really helpful way. I'm not saying this is the best way for everybody, but for some people, many people, it's really helpful. There's a way in which we've gone to keyboards. We can do this if you have a facility in doing this, but there's a way in which a pen and paper kind of, engages the hand, of course, and the feeling of the pen against the paper. But there's something about drawing a line, connecting things, or crossing things out, or making a bulleted list in the margin, or something like this, can be really helpful. This is what I do to organize talks. And it's fun for me to look back on the chicken scratch I have, and it's all kinds of stuff, and turn the page this way and write a little things, and then I look at it, and then I'm not quite sure, and then I go to the keyboard and start to organize some of the stuff that's on the paper. So this way in which, if we want to have this aspiration to use thoughts to think well, that is to really solve problems instead of just swim around in them, ask questions, have a real commitment that you actually do want to solve it. There's a way in which we can get lost. I don't know how to explain this. Maybe you have had this experience where you want to solve something, but it's also a difficult thing. So you want to solve it, and yet you also want to be a little bit distant from it so that you don't feel the emotional discomfort. Things that are hard to solve are often difficult because they have some emotional content, that are some of our buttons are getting triggered, or something is, maybe an underlying emotion is trying to bubble up in some kind of way. So can we say, well, I'm going to really want to solve this? Whether this is a big, giant thing, how do I prepare for my vacation in 2 weeks? Or is it, how do I have this difficult conversation with my coworker who is always correcting me? Or how do I tell my partner that they're not doing their share of the housework again, but I want to make this not be confrontational? What are some ways that I can do this in a way that I'm not falling into these old patterns, and not so that we don't get into the same fight that we often get into, whatever it might be? So maybe I'll just say that I did mention this idea of entertaining thoughts. So maybe I'm transitioning now to talk about meditation in particular. We might notice that some of the thoughts are just entertainment. Certainly outside of that either, but thinking about, well, let's see, so, that room, I really should put up some different window coverings because it doesn't really match the furniture in there, or maybe I should paint it a different color, or whatever it might be. Might have some decorating ideas, or we might have some thoughts about sports. Well, who should play? Are they going to put that person in the infield in the next game? I'm saying this not really knowing baseball very well, but just there's this way in which we kind of just think these types of things. It's just a way of the mind entertaining itself. And then we can just, if we find this happening, we could just maybe drop in a question, or maybe you could just even reflect on it right now. Is there a fear of boredom? Does this seem like the absolute worst thing that could ever happen? How many quadrillion, bazillion dollars are spent to make sure that nobody is ever bored? It's quite something, right? Boredom. It's not so bad. And it turns out, if you have a mindfulness practice, you can never be bored again. Just feel like, oh, this feels like boredom. What does boredom feel like? Sense of impatience. There's some restlessness maybe. There's irritation with whatever I think should be happening instead, or something like this. But there's this way, we kind of fall into thinking, which often isn't helpful, just so that we won't be bored. But instead, if we notice there's this little thing that we just want to get our phones out, can we not take our phones out and just be with the experience of boredom and just get to know it? It turns out to be quite interesting, which is fascinating, that boredom is interesting. So just an invitation. And then maybe I'll say, so here are some things, if you find yourself in meditation, some things to work with. If you find that there's a compulsive or obsessive compulsive, these are words that don't sound so great, but there can be a way in which there's a lot of energy behind thoughts and some spinning and feeling like they have a lot of energy behind them. So here's something to do. Here's some things to do. One, just drop in the question, what will my next thought be? Ask yourself now, what will your next thought be? This can be fascinating, to kind of like be looking and like waiting for thought, and you notice there's this small little gap while you're waiting for the next thought, which the next thought is most likely, oh, this is silly, or wait, oh, that's, am I doing this right? Or something really fast that we often aren't noticing as a thought. But just that dropping in, what will my next thought be? Does two things. It shifts our relationship, right? We're no longer lost in the thoughts. We're now the observer. And it disrupts the momentum of whatever was happening. These two things can be really powerful. And you can just again and again drop in these things. What will the next thought be? There's something about when I practice with this that like sitting back and looking at thoughts kind of like connects to just this vastness, this openness, this space. Like there's no problems. They're just hanging out, saying what the next thought is going to be. There's something that can be really beautiful about this because it makes it easier and easier for this vast spaciousness to open up. So that's one thing to do if you find yourself with meditation and I guess it doesn't even have to be in meditation, in daily life. What will the next thought be? Maybe one thing I'll say is that sometimes it's helpful if we find ourselves with a lot of thinking and a pressure behind thinking, to remind ourselves, okay, these are just thoughts. Like nothing out there in the external world is changing. We're just thinking. Because there's this way in which we tend to link some like our thoughts with what's going to happen or might happen or will happen or something like this. If we can just say, oh, it's just mental activity. It's just what minds do. We don't have to take it personally. We don't have to make it into a big problem. This is just what minds do. There's a way that can help support a certain amount of relaxation and ease with this recognition of, okay, this doesn't have to be turned into a big problem. Because thoughts are actually just, if you really look at them, are only pointing to thoughts, which are pointing to other thoughts, which are pointing to other thoughts, which are pointing to other thoughts. Right? There's nothing out here that's actually happening. It's just thinking. It's just thinking. And so there's this way kind of like noticing not only the insubstantiality of them, but how they're just happening inside here in this thought space. So that's a second thing. If you can bring this to mind, so maybe just remind yourself about this when you find yourself with this certain amount of thinking. A third thing, one, what will my next thought be? To recognize it's just thoughts, mental activity. The third is, can you bring some curiosity to the experience? The experience of thinking. But that might be a little bit hard. So maybe just experience whatever's happening. Sounds, sights, pressure against the body, bodily sensations, feeling the clothes against the skin, these types of things. Just like bring some of the energy towards other sense doors. And that'll kind of like take out some of the energy that's going towards thinking. So as a third thing to do is just go towards another sense door. If you're meditating and you feel like, oh wow, okay, this is not helpful and I'm really caught up in this, it can be really helpful to just systematically do a body scan. Tune into the bodily experience on the head, around the eyes, around the mouth, the shoulders, upper back, lower back, chest, belly, hips, legs, and feet. And just kind of a few seconds in each spot and just checking them. This gives the mind something to do, which can be really helpful and kind of like take up some of the bandwidth. And it also is a way, it starts to help you get more embodied. And then when you're more embodied, thoughts are less spinning around and going elsewhere and things like this. So a body scan can be really helpful, just intentionally doing this systematically through the body. Then if there's a lot of energy around thoughts when you're meditating, you could do some metta practice. Because metta practice is using thoughts, so it's also kind of like using some of the mental bandwidth, but it's using some of the thoughts in a way that's positive and supportive. And what I mean about metta practice, those of you who, many of you might already have a metta practice, but it's something bringing to mind somebody who's dear to you, and you might send some goodwill. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. So just these 4 phrases. And we could just repeat them. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. And this can really just change the inner ecology of the mind. This sincere wish for somebody that we care about, somebody that's dear to us, and to be wishing them well, can be really make a difference. And there's something also about the rhythm, about just saying these phrases over and over, that just naturally start to settle things down, bring some stability and quiet to the mind, so that the mind isn't just thrashing about. So I offered quite a few things here. If you find yourself really kind of like lost in thinking, ask yourself, what will the next thought be? I love this one. I think this is fun. It can be surprising and can really, it can be a little bit of a shock to the mind in some kind of way. It's not used to being asked what's going to be next. Recognize it's just mental activity. They're just thoughts that are happening. And there's a way that noticing that can bring a little more relaxation and remove a little bit of the urgency that might be there. Bring some curiosity to the experience, like to other sense doors, what's being heard, what's being seen, what's being felt in the body. Do a body scan, just systematically go through the body, or do metta practice. So these are some of the ways in which we can work with thinking, not because we have to get rid of thinking, but just so that we can have a relationship with our thoughts that really supports some well-being. And that can be support some greater peace and ease and freedom. Because when we start to pay attention, we start to notice we actually are wrestling with our thoughts or we're lost in thoughts. It's either one or the other, usually, but they're just useful companions. Can we have them be useful companions instead of being harassed or harangued by them? And maybe I'll close with this short poem. It's by Rosemerry Trommer. It's called Could I Say It and Really Mean It? By Rosemerry Trommer. A pomegranate, tennis racket, wide open lily, basically anything can act as a Trojan horse to get those old ideas close to me. And dang, I'm confronted again with all the ways I've let down the world and all the ways I should have done better. How many times have I tried to escape these thoughts? I've run mountain races and written thousands of pages and wept a spring flood and confessed and bled, and still they find a way back to me. Sometimes they come knives drawn, but more often they come wearing fluffy robes and slippers, making themselves at home. I cornered one today, looked it right in the eye. What? I said, what do I have to do? It shook its head and said, all I ever wanted was for you to say, thank you. There's this different relationship to our thoughts. So I'll end there and open it up to see if there's some comments or questions. Thank you. We'd like to do that. We'd like you to use the microphone so other people can hear.
You mentioned you have a background in research. Can you tell us more about that, if you're comfortable sharing?
I'll just say I have a PhD in biochemistry, cool. And I used to do cancer research in a laboratory, white lab coat, the whole 9 yards.
Cool. Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, right behind you.
Hello.
Hi.
I was just wondering if you have any advice in terms of people who struggle with chronic health issues, and whilst meditating and doing the body scans, how do you kind of not focus on the painful parts of that?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot I could say. I'll say briefly two things. One is it's really helpful, if you can, to not use the word that rhymes with the word rain and starts with the letter P. Instead, to really think about, is this a stabbing or is it a throbbing? Is it hot or is it cold? Is it moving? Is it like dynamic or is it in one place? Is it diffuse or is it like really pinpointed? So that is to kind of like zoom in and maybe like describe the experience, because it's there, it's already there. So that's one way, because there's one way in which we slap a label on it, that then we have a relationship with this label. Oh my gosh, this is further evidence of my imminent demise. You know, there's this way in which all these, rightly so, appropriately, that we have this when there's, I'm just going to use this word pain, when there's pain, then we might think it just sets off a whole cascade of thinking thoughts about doctors and emergencies and what's wrong with us and all these types of things. So instead to maybe zoom in is one way. Another way is to zoom out, and that is, I'll just say briefly, we could say to notice, not maybe during a body scan, if we find ourselves getting sucked into, oh my gosh, this, whatever the discomfort might be, can you turn your attention to other sense doors? Sounds is a really good one, because that there's a way, and I'm just going to open up and listen to sounds, and just let sounds arise. You don't have to figure them out. You don't have to know anything about them. Because opening up to sounds is a way that often brings a little bit more spaciousness. And then maybe the third thing I'll say is there a neutral or a pleasant experience in the body? And as best you can you rest the attention there? That's often not easy. When there's discomfort, it really is compelling and calling for us. So I'm not saying that all these will be fast and easy, but they definitely are ways forward. Is that helpful? Okay, thank you. Somebody else have a question or comment? There was a hand that went up over here somewhere. Oh, sorry, Elena.
I, feel like when I am struggling with thoughts and I try different things like you're suggesting in meditation, like doing the body scan or doing a metta practice, then I start judging myself that I'm jumping around to different strategies, and then I think that's like wrong or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And well, how long do I do the metta practice? Should I just do that the entire time, or can I then do a self-compassion? May I, be happy? May I be? And then I start. Well, I'll think about her. So then I'm like then I just do that, and then I don't know. Then I judge that I'm having monkey mind as far as like my strategies. I don't know if that.
Yeah, no, this makes perfect sense.
And
And you're highlighting, we could just spend the whole time doing like 2 minutes of this practice, 2 minutes of that practice, 2 minutes, then jumping all around and like this kind of stuff.
And then one more thing is that I've heard, like, you pick one thing to focus on, like your breath or the nose, feeling the breath in the nose or the stomach or the, abdomen, and then like I'll switch and be like, no, I'm feeling it here. No, now I'm feeling it there. And then again, it feels like I'm doing something wrong or something.
Yeah, this is such a great comment. Thank you. There's a few things I can say about here. So often if we start our meditation practice with wanting to settle the mind and calm the mind, and it's really helpful to choose one thing and to stay on it, just as you've heard. But if you find that you just can't do that, I think it's really helpful to switch. Because there's concentration practice is just stay no matter what. But here, I'm not talking about concentration practice. I'm talking more about mindfulness practice, where we're being with what's arising. And if what's arising is I just can't settle, the minds are all over there, all over the place, then we just work with what's arising, a mind that's doing something or other, and then do a body scan as best we can. And I do agree, it's probably best if we switch, I'm using this word best loosely. Maybe here's what's the most useful. Instead of saying rules, we could set a North Star is where does it feel easeful? Where does it feel easeful? And yeah, maybe that's the direction. So if you feel like you're doing loving kindness practice, but that you're getting wrapped around the axle trying to decide who to do it to, and like all these kinds of things, which happens, right? If there's this pressure of speech, a pressure of thinking, then chances are there's something underneath, some emotional thing that we don't want to see, and that emotion is still there, so it's going to pop up as thoughts or with the busyness, with mindfulness, or it's going to pop up as body scan, jumping all around or something like this. So I didn't say this. I could give a whole nother talk on thoughts, but maybe you could drop in, is there an emotion that's fueling this? So I just said a lot of things. So one is maybe to choose a North Star, what helps with ease. If you find that you're just doing this and then doing this and then doing this, maybe drop in the question, is there an emotion under here that's fueling this agitation that's showing up in all these different ways? And
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're at 8:30 here, so thank you all for your kind attention. And you're welcome to come up to here and talk to me if you'd like. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the evening. Thank you.